Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
Nightmare in the Rear Guard. On a cold winter night in 2023, a small town in Ukraine became a fierce battlefield. The Rear Guard unit, known as the Warlords, was tasked with defending the town from enemy attacks, assisting survivors, and maintaining order. The Warlords consisted of 10 soldiers led by Captain Dmitry and his second-in-command, Lieutenant Natasha. The other members were Sergei, Ivan, Roman, Alex, Nikolai, Kirill, and Mikhail. All were well-trained and experienced fighters. This town, once peaceful, had been transformed by war. Homes were destroyed, schools and hospitals lay in ruins, and residents had evacuated, leaving the Warlords to defend the desolate place. One night, the Warlords were ordered to check the old hospital, a temporary shelter for some survivors. As they navigated the rubble-filled streets and bombed-out buildings, the grim reality of war weighed heavily on them. Upon reaching the old hospital, they heard strange sounds coming from the basement. The noises were a mix of soft whispers and occasional terrifying screams. Captain Dmitry ordered his men to prepare for combat and led them into the basement. The hospital basement was pitch dark, illuminated only by their flashlights. The soldiers felt an eerie chill as they descended deeper. The whispers grew louder, and everyone sensed something was amiss. In one of the basement rooms, they found signs of a struggle and fresh bloodstains, but no bodies. An unexplainable fear gripped them. Lieutenant Natasha ordered everyone to stay alert and move to the next room. Suddenly, they heard a piercing scream and saw a shadowy figure darting through the darkness. The soldiers fired their weapons, but nothing hit the mark. A sense of dread filled Captain Dmitry as he realized they were not alone. As they tried to find their way out of the basement, they heard the distant rumble of artillery fire. The walls and ceiling shook, debris fell around them, and they knew they were not safe there. Captain Dmitry ordered a retreat to the surface, but upon emerging, they saw the town under heavy bombardment. Shells exploded nearby, and the enemy advanced closer. The Warlords had to find shelter and contact headquarters. While hiding in an old building, they heard another scream from within. A cold fear seeped into their bones as they realized something unnatural was nearby. Sergei and Ivan went to investigate the noise, while the others prepared for a possible fight. Entering a room, they encountered a terrifying sight. Shadowy figures shaped like humans, but faceless, standing in the corner, staring at them. Sergei and Ivan fired their guns, but the bullets passed through the figures harmlessly. The shadows moved towards them, and a paralyzing fear gripped the soldiers. They felt an icy chill and struggled to breathe. Just then, Captain Dmitry and the rest of the unit arrived. They used flash grenades to momentarily dispel the shadows and pulled Sergei and Ivan out of the building. The Warlords' ordeal continued through the cold, terrifying night. They faced human enemies and unexplainable supernatural forces. The battle to protect the town and its survivors raged on, with the soldiers unsure if they would survive the nightmare. A tale of horror in the Russia-Ukraine war. In the heart of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine lies the Donetsk region, an area marked by intense fighting and bloodshed. The ongoing war has created an atmosphere ripe for tales of the supernatural. One such tale, whispered among the soldiers, is that of the Phantom Battalion, a ghostly regiment that appears and disappears, leaving behind a trail of fear and mystery. The war between Russia and Ukraine had intensified. The strategic town of Avdiivka in the Donetsk region was of particular importance. Both sides had fought fiercely for control, and the landscape was littered with the remnants of battle, burnt-out tanks, destroyed buildings, and the haunting silence of abandoned streets. Amidst this chaos, a Ukrainian reconnaissance unit was tasked with a perilous mission to infiltrate enemy lines and gather crucial intelligence. Captain Ivan Petrov led a small team of seasoned soldiers. They were to navigate through a series of underground tunnels, remnants from the Soviet era, which ran beneath Avdiivka and extended into no man's land. These tunnels, while offering cover, were also fraught with danger and tales of the unexplained. As the team descended into the tunnels, the air grew colder and the darkness more oppressive. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing old Soviet murals and propaganda posters on the walls, ghosts of a bygone era. The silence was punctuated only by the distant echoes of the war above. About an hour into their journey, the soldiers began to hear unsettling sounds, whispers, footsteps, and distant, unidentifiable noises. Private Marco, the youngest member of the team, swore he saw shadows moving just beyond the reach of their lights. Dismissing it as nerves, Captain Petrov pressed on. However, the deeper they went, the stranger the occurrences became. Their radios, initially clear, began to emit static and distorted voices. At one point, Sergeant Alexei found an old, blood-stained Soviet uniform neatly folded on a alleged chilling relic that seemed out of place. The team reached a large chamber that once served as a Soviet command post. As they spread out to secure the area, the temperature dropped suddenly. Frost formed on their gear, and breath became visible in the cold air. It was then that they saw them ghostly figures in old Soviet uniforms, marching in formation through the chamber. These apparitions were eerily silent, their expressions blank, and their eyes hollow. Captain Petrov, a rational man, struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. The Phantom Battalion moved as if reenacting a patrol, oblivious to the presence of the living soldiers. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the sense of dread was palpable. Private Marco, unable to contain his fear, fired a shot at the apparitions. The bullet passed through harmlessly, but the noise seemed to disrupt the phantoms. They turned, their empty eyes locking onto the soldiers. The air grew heavier, and an overwhelming sense of malevolence filled the chamber. Realizing the danger, Captain Petrov ordered a retreat. The team scrambled back through the tunnels, pursued by the chilling whispers and the sense of unseen eyes watching them. The journey back seemed endless, the oppressive atmosphere weighing on their minds. Emerging into the night, the soldiers were greeted by the familiar sounds of battle. They reported their encounter to their superiors, but were met with skepticism and dismissal. The official explanation was stress and exhaustion playing tricks on their minds. However, among the soldiers, the story of the Phantom Battalion spread like wildfire. Captain Petrov, a decorated officer, couldn't shake the feeling that what they encountered was real. The haunted look in his eyes told of a man who had faced something beyond comprehension. His reports, though unofficial, were documented in whispers and shared among the ranks. The tunnels beneath Avdiivka remained a place of fear and mystery. Soldiers avoided them whenever possible, and those who ventured down spoke of eerie occurrences, strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. The legend of the Phantom Battalion became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the past horrors that still lingered in the shadows of war. In the months that followed, stories of supernatural encounters continued to emerge from various parts of the conflict zone. Whether these tales were born from the stress and trauma of war, or if they were genuine encounters with the unknown, remained a topic of debate. The Phantom Battalion of Donetsk stands as one of the most chilling stories to come out of the Russia-Ukraine war. It is a tale that blurs the lines between reality and the supernatural, reflecting the deep psychological impact of the conflict on those who fight it. As long as the war rages on, such stories will continue to haunt the minds of soldiers, serving as a grim reminder of the unseen forces that linger in the darkness. Patrol of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, established after the catastrophic nuclear disaster in 1986, is a 30-kilometer radius area around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This zone remains largely uninhabited due to high levels of radiation, creating an eerie, desolate environment filled with abandoned buildings and overgrown vegetation. During the conflict, both Ukrainian and Russian forces have been reported to patrol the area due to its strategic significance. A group of Ukrainian soldiers was on a routine patrol in the Chernobyl exclusion zone at night. The silent, deserted streets of Pripyat, with its dilapidated Soviet-era buildings and remnants of a once bustling town, set the stage for an unnerving experience. As the soldiers moved cautiously through the town, they began hearing faint whispers and footsteps that seemed to come from all directions. Despite their training and the logical explanations they tried to reassure themselves with, the oppressive atmosphere of the zone began to weigh heavily on them. One soldier claimed to see shadowy figures moving just beyond their line of sight, darting in and out of the buildings. The most terrifying encounter occurred near the Ferris wheel, an iconic but ghostly landmark, Pripyat. The soldiers reported seeing a group of ghostly figures dressed in old Soviet military uniforms, marching silently through the square. These apparitions were semi-transparent, their faces expressionless, eyes hollow, and they appeared to be reenacting some long-forgotten patrol. One of the soldiers, whose grandfather had served in the Soviet army, felt a cold chill as he recognized the uniforms and the disciplined march. It was as if the spirits of soldiers who had once been stationed in the area or who had perished during the initial disaster response were still carrying out their duties. The soldiers, gripped by a deep sense of dread, quickly retreated from the area. They reported the incident to their superiors, who dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations. However, the soldiers knew what they had seen and felt, and the encounter left a lasting impression on them. They avoided patrolling the Chernobyl exclusion zone at night whenever possible from then on. This tale has been passed around among troops and has become part of the folklore surrounding the war. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, with its history of tragedy and abandonment, serves as a potent backdrop for such supernatural encounters. The soldiers' experience reflects the psychological strain of operating in such an environment, where the past seems to linger just beneath the surface, waiting to intersect with the present. The ghostly patrol of the Chernobyl exclusion zone is just one of many eerie stories emerging from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Whether seen as a product of heightened stress and fear or as genuine encounters with the supernatural, these tales add an extra layer of horror to the already grim realities of war. The Ghosts of Bakhmut. The city of Bakhmut, a strategic location in eastern Ukraine, has witnessed intense fighting throughout the Russia-Ukraine war. Recently recaptured by Ukrainian forces, the city, now in ruins, has become a focal point for chilling tales of the supernatural. This is one such story, recounting the eerie experiences of soldiers in the aftermath of the battle. In the spring of 2024, Ukrainian forces launched a major offensive to retake Bakhmut from Russian occupation. The battle was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The city's once bustling streets were left in ruins, with buildings reduced to rubble and the echoes of conflict lingering in the air. Following their victory, Ukrainian troops were tasked with securing the area and rooting out any remaining threats. Among them was Sergeant Alexander, a seasoned soldier with numerous battles under his belt. His unit was assigned to patrol the devastated neighborhoods and ensure no enemy forces were hiding among the ruins. One evening, as Sergeant Alexander's unit moved through a particularly ravaged district, they began to notice strange occurrences: unexplained cold spots, flickering lights, and distant, disembodied whispers filled the air. Private Mikola, a young recruit, swore he saw shadowy figures darting between the rubble, but his claims were met with skepticism. As the patrol continued, the soldiers' unease grew. They reached an old, bombed-out church at the edge of the city, its once grand facade now ghostly as silhouette against the darkening sky. The air inside was thick with an oppressive sense of dread, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the damaged structure. While securing the church, the soldiers stumbled upon a gruesome discovery: remnants of a makeshift field hospital used by Russian troops. Blood-stained stretchers, discarded medical supplies, and hastily abandoned personal belongings littered the floor. The sense of unease intensified as they explored further. Sergeant Alexander found himself drawn to the altar, where an eerie light seemed to flicker. As he approached, the temperature dropped suddenly and a thick fog began to form. Out of the mist, ghostly figures in old military uniforms appeared, their faces pale and eyes hollow. One of the apparitions, a young woman in a nurse's uniform, reached out towards Alexander, her expression a mix of sorrow and desperation. Frozen in place, he could only watch as the ghostly figures moved through the church, reenacting scenes of triage and treatment. The sight was both haunting and heart-wrenching. Private Mikola, already on edge, panicked at the sight of the apparitions. He fired a shot, the sound echoing through the church and disrupting the spectral scene. The ghosts turned towards the soldiers, their eyes now filled with a chilling malevolence. The air grew colder, and the sense of danger was palpable. Realizing they were in over their heads, Sergeant Alexander ordered a retreat. The soldiers scrambled out of the church, the ghostly figures seemingly following them. As they ran, the whispers grew louder, and the cold seemed to cling to them, like a shroud. Back at their base, the soldiers reported their encounter to their superiors. Their account was met with a mixture of disbelief and concern. The official explanation was that the soldiers were experiencing stress-induced hallucinations, a common occurrence in war zones. However, among the unit, the story of the haunted church quickly spread. Sergeant Alexander, a pragmatic man, struggled to reconcile what he had seen with his rational beliefs. He knew the horrors of war could leave deep psychological scars, but this experience felt different, more tangible, more real. The memory of the ghostly nurse's sorrowful eyes haunted his thoughts. The church at the edge of Bakhmut became a place of fear and mystery. Soldiers avoided it whenever possible, unwilling to face the chilling apparitions within. Stories of supernatural encounters continued to circulate, with some claiming to hear whispers or see shadowy figures in the ruined streets. As the war dragged on, the line between reality and the supernatural grew increasingly blurred for those on the front lines. The ghosts of Bakhmut served as a reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked in the shadows of war, haunting both the living and the dead. The Ghosts of Bakhmut is a recent and chilling tale from the Russia-Ukraine war, capturing the fear and mystery experienced by soldiers in the aftermath of intense conflict. It serves as a stark reminder of the psychological toll of war and the eerie presence of the past in the battle-scarred landscapes of the present. The haunted battlefield of Mariupol, a tale of horror in the Russia-Ukraine war. Mariupol, a strategic port city in southeastern Ukraine, has been a focal point of intense battles during the Russia-Ukraine war. The city changed hands multiple times, leaving behind a landscape scarred by fierce combat and heavy casualties. Amidst the ruins and the remnants of war, tales of supernatural encounters have emerged, particularly from the soldiers who recaptured and held the city. In the spring of 2022, Ukrainian forces launched a major offensive to reclaim Mariupol from Russian occupation. The battle was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering significant losses. The city's streets were littered with the debris of war-destroyed vehicles, shattered buildings, and the bodies of fallen soldiers and civilians. After weeks of brutal fighting, Ukrainian forces finally regained control of Mariupol. The aftermath of the battle left a heavy toll on the soldiers who were tasked with securing the city and clearing the remaining threats. Among the ruins, they encountered not just remnants of war, but also something far more unsettling. Sergeant Andriy Kovalenko led a platoon assigned to patrol the city's outskirts and ensure no enemy forces were hiding among the ruins. One night, as they moved through a particularly devastated district, they began to hear strange noises, whispers, distant cries, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty streets. Private Yuri, a new recruit, claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving in the rubble. The figures seemed to vanish whenever he tried to get a closer look. The soldiers initially dismissed these sightings as nerves and exhaustion, playing tricks on their minds. However, the eerie occurrences soon became too frequent to ignore. One of the most chilling encounters happened at an abandoned hospital on the edge of the city. The hospital had been a site of heavy fighting and was now a gutted shell, its halls filled with debris and the stench of death. The soldiers entered the building to search for any remaining Russian troops or booby traps. As they moved through the darkened corridors, Their flashlights revealed scenes of bloody operating tables, makeshift morgues, and the scattered remains of those who had perished. The atmosphere was thick with an oppressive sense of dread. In the surgical wing, the soldiers encounter something inexplicable. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a thick mist began to form, swirling around their legs. Out of the mist emerged ghostly figures, nurses and doctors in old, blood-stained uniforms, their faces twisted in expressions of anguish. These apparitions moved as if performing their duties, oblivious to the presence of the living. Private Yuri, already on edge from previous encounters, was assigned to check the hospital's basement, which housed the morgue. As he descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of fear gripped him. His flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. In the morgue, he found rows of body bags and the skeletal remains of those who had died in the early days of the war. As he turned to leave, he saw them figures wrapped in sheets rising slowly from the gurneys. Their eyes were hollow, and their mouths opened in silent screams. Paralyzed with fear, Yuri stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. The room was plunged into darkness. Save for the faint glow of emergency exit signs, Yuri's screams echoed through the hospital, drawing the attention of his comrades. They found him in a state of shock, babbling about the dead coming to life. His fellow soldiers, though skeptical, could not deny the palpable sense of dread that hung over the morgue. In the weeks that followed, reports of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena continued. Soldiers on night patrols spoke of encountering a phantom regiment soldiers in old uniforms, marching silently through the ruined streets. These apparitions appeared and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only an overwhelming sense of sorrow and fear. One particularly harrowing encounter involved Lieutenant Sasha, who claimed to have seen a ghostly figure of a young boy no older than 12 wandering through the rubble. The boy's eyes were filled with a haunting emptiness, and when Sasha tried to approach, the boy vanished into thin air. The encounters took a heavy toll on the soldiers' mental health. Many began to experience nightmares and flashbacks, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Some turned to alcohol to numb their fear, while others sought solace in prayer or superstitious rituals. The stories of the haunted hospital and the phantom regiment spread, quickly becoming part of the unit's lore. Commanders, concerned about the morale of their troops, ordered an investigation. Officially, the strange occurrences were attributed to stress and the psychological impact of prolonged combat. However, those who had experienced the encounters knew that something far more sinister was at play. The haunted battlefield of Mariupol stands as a grim testament to the horrors of war. The tales of supernatural encounters, either born from the trauma of battle or from genuine experiences with the unknown, add an extra layer of terror to an already brutal conflict. As long as the war continues, the ghost of Mariupol will remain haunting the ruins and the memories of those who fought there. The haunted battlefield of Mariupol, a tale of horror in the Russia-Ukraine war. Mariupol, a strategic port city in southeastern Ukraine, has been a focal point of intense battles during the Russia-Ukraine war. The city changed hands multiple times, leaving behind a landscape scarred by fierce combat and heavy casualties. Amidst the ruins and the remnants of war, tales of supernatural encounters have emerged, particularly from the soldiers who recaptured and held the city. In the spring of 2022, Ukrainian forces launched a major offensive to reclaim Mariupol from Russian occupation. The battle was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering significant losses. The city's streets were littered with the debris of war-destroyed vehicles, shattered buildings, and the bodies of fallen soldiers and civilians. After weeks of brutal fighting, Ukrainian forces finally regained control of Mariupol. The aftermath of the battle left a heavy toll on the soldiers who were tasked with securing the city and clearing the remaining threats. Among the ruins, they encountered not just remnants of war, but also something far more unsettling. Sergeant Andriy Kovalenko led a platoon assigned to patrol the city's outskirts and ensure no enemy forces were hiding among the ruins. One night, as they moved through a particularly devastated district, they began to hear strange noises, whispers, distant cries, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty streets. Private Yuri, a new recruit, claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving in the rubble. The figures seemed to vanish whenever he tried to get a closer look. The soldiers initially dismissed these sightings as nerves and exhaustion, playing tricks on their minds. However, the eerie occurrences soon became too frequent to ignore. One of the most chilling encounters happened at an abandoned hospital on the edge of the city. The hospital had been a site of heavy fighting and was now a gutted shell, its halls filled with debris and the stench of death. The soldiers entered the building to search for any remaining Russian troops or booby traps. As they moved through the darkened corridors, their flashlights revealed scenes of bloody operating tables, makeshift morgues, and the scattered remains of those who had perished. The atmosphere was thick with an oppressive sense of dread. In the surgical wing, the soldiers encountered something inexplicable. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a thick mist began to form, swirling around their legs. Out of the mist emerged ghostly figures, nurses and doctors in old, blood-stained uniforms, their faces twisted in expressions of anguish. These apparitions moved as if performing their duties, oblivious to the presence of the living. Private Yuri, already on edge from previous encounters, was assigned to check the hospital's basement, which housed the morgue. As he descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of fear gripped him. His flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. In the morgue, he found rows of body bags and the skeletal remains of those who had died in the early days of the war. As he turned to leave, he saw them figures wrapped in sheets rising slowly from the gurneys. Their eyes were hollow, and their mouths opened in silent screams. Paralyzed with fear, Yuri stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of emergency exit signs. Yuri's screams echoed through the hospital, drawing the attention of his comrades. They found him in a state of shock, babbling about the dead coming to life. His fellow soldiers, though skeptical, could not deny the palpable sense of dread that hung over the morgue. In the weeks that followed, reports of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena continued. Soldiers on night patrols spoke of encountering a phantom regiment soldiers in old uniforms, marching silently through the ruined streets. These apparitions appeared and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only an overwhelming sense of sorrow and fear. One particularly harrowing encounter involved Lieutenant Sasha, who claimed to have seen a ghostly figure of a young boy no older than 12 wandering through the rubble. The boy's eyes were filled with a haunting emptiness, and when Sasha tried to approach, the boy vanished into thin air. The encounters took a heavy toll on the soldiers' mental health. Many began to experience nightmares and flashbacks, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Some turned to alcohol to numb their fear, while others sought solace in prayer or superstitious rituals. The stories of the haunted hospital and the Phantom Regiment spread, quickly becoming part of the unit's lore. Commanders, concerned about the morale of their troops, ordered an investigation. Officially, the strange occurrences were attributed to stress and the psychological impact of prolonged combat. However, those who had experienced the encounters knew that something far more sinister was at play. The haunted battlefield of Mariupol stands as a grim testament to the horrors of war. The tales of supernatural encounters, either born from the trauma of battle or from genuine experiences with the unknown, add an extra layer of terror to an already brutal conflict. As long as the war continues, the ghost of Mariupol will remain haunting the ruins and the memories of those who fought there. The Shadows of Severodonetsk. Severodonetsk, a city in eastern Ukraine, has been a critical battleground throughout the Russia-Ukraine war. The front lines have shifted multiple times, leaving the rearguard units to protect the city from constant artillery fire and the remnants of fierce combat. As these soldiers hold the line, they encounter not only the physical dangers of war, but also the eerie and supernatural phenomena that arise from the conflict's aftermath. Captain Ivan led the 3rd Platoon, a seasoned group of soldiers tasked with protecting the rear of Severodonetsk. Their mission was to secure key infrastructure, assist in evacuations, and repel any enemy forces that might break through the front lines. The platoon consisted of 30 men and women, each with their own stories and reasons for fight. As they settled into their positions, the soldiers couldn't ignore the city's eerie atmosphere. The once bustling streets were now silent, the buildings reduced to rubble. There was a sense of foreboding that seemed to linger in the air, a silent reminder of the horrors that had taken place. The initial days were marked by sporadic artillery fire, the distant thuds and explosions, a constant reminder of the battle raging at the front. The platoon conducted regular patrols, securing key areas and checking for any remaining enemy forces. It was during one such patrol that the first signs of something unnatural began to appear. While patrolling a bombed-out school, Corporal Markova spotted movement in the shadows. She raised her rifle, signaling for silence. As they moved closer, they heard whispers, faint, indistinct voices echoing through the halls. The air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Private Shevchenko, already nervous, felt a hand grip his shoulder. He turned, expecting to see a comrade, but there was no one there. He shrugged it off as his imagination, but the unease lingered. One evening, Captain Petrenko received orders to investigate an old hospital on the outskirts of the city. The hospital had been used as a field hospital by Russian forces and was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died there. The platoon was skeptical but followed orders nonetheless. As they entered the building, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the silence was oppressive. The soldiers moved cautiously through the darkened halls, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the surgical wing, they found makeshift operating tables, bloodstains, and discarded medical supplies. It was here that the apparitions began to appear. Ghostly figures of doctors and nurses, their faces twisted in pain and anguish, moved through the room as if reenacting their final moments. The soldiers watched in stunned silence, unable to believe their eyes. Sergeant Mikhailov, trying to maintain control, ordered the platoon to leave. As they turned to go, the apparitions turned their hollow eyes towards them, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic set in, and the soldiers stumbled out of the hospital, their hearts racing. Back at their base, the platoon tried to make sense of what they had seen. Captain Petrenko reported the encounter to his superiors, but their account was met with disbelief. Officially, the strange occurrences were attributed to stress and the psychological toll of war. However, the encounters did not stop. On night patrols, soldiers began to see ghostly figures in old military uniforms, moving silently through the rubble. These apparitions, seemingly oblivious to the living, would disappear as quickly as they appeared. One particularly chilling encounter involved Private Shevchenko, who saw a group of ghostly soldiers marching through the ruins. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes hollow. When he tried to approach, they vanished, leaving behind only an eerie silence. As the front lines shifted, the platoon found themselves under increasing artillery fire. The enemy seemed to target their positions with uncanny accuracy, and the constant bombardment took a toll on their nerves. One night, during a particularly intense barrage, the platoon took shelter in a partially destroyed church. The building offered some protection, but the relentless shelling shook the very foundations. Amidst the chaos, strange phenomena began to occur. As the barrage continued, the ground beneath them trembled, and the ceiling began to collapse. The soldiers, desperate to survive, fought to maintain their composure. It was in this moment of crisis that they saw the ghostly figure of a woman in a tattered dress, standing amidst the destruction, her eyes filled with sorrow. Following the artillery barrage, the platoon was ordered to hold a defensive line in a network of trenches on the outskirts of the city. The trenches, filled with mud and debris, were a grim reminder of the ongoing conflict. The soldiers dug in, preparing for the next assault. It was in these trenches that the supernatural encounters reached a new level of intensity. At night, the soldiers heard voices, soft, pleading whispers that seemed to come from the very ground beneath them. The air was filled with an oppressive sense of dread, and many began to experience vivid nightmares. One night, as Sergeant Mikhailov stood watch, he saw ghostly figures emerging from the fog. These apparitions, dressed in the tattered uniforms of soldiers from various eras, moved silently through the trenches. Their eyes were filled with a haunting emptiness, and their bodies bore the scars of countless battles. Private Shevchenko, unable to sleep, joined Mikhailov at his post. Together they watched as the ghostly soldiers passed by, their faces etched with sorrow and pain. The two men exchanged a silent look, knowing that these were the spirits of those who had perished in the trenches. As the conflict intensified, the platoon found themselves facing a major enemy offensive. The Russian forces, determined to retake Severodonetsk, launched a massive assault on the city. The rear guard unit, now heavily outnumbered, prepared for a desperate defense. The battle raged throughout the night, with artillery shells and gunfire lighting up the sky. Amidst the chaos, the soldiers encountered supernatural phenomena that defied explanation. Ghostly figures appeared on the battlefield, their presence both unnerving and strangely comforting. Captain Petrenko, leading his men with unwavering resolve, felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He turned to see the ghostly figure of a young woman, her eyes filled with a sorrowful determination. She nodded towards the enemy lines, and Petrenko understood these spirits were here to help. As the battle reached its climax, the ghostly apparitions joined the fight. The soldiers watched in awe as the spirits of fallen comrades and long-dead soldiers moved through the enemy ranks, sowing confusion and fear. The tide began to turn, and the Ukrainian forces rallied, pushing back the attackers. The dawn brought a grim silence to the battlefield. The enemy offensive had been repelled, but the cost was high. The rear guard unit, though victorious, had suffered heavy losses. As the soldiers tended to the wounded and counted their dead, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had been aided by something beyond this world. Captain Petrenko, reflecting on the night's events, couldn't deny the reality of the supernatural encounters. He gathered his remaining men and spoke to them about what they had experienced. The platoon, once skeptical, now believed in the spirits that had fought alongside them. In the days that followed, the stories of the ghostly soldiers and their assistants spread throughout the ranks. The rear guard unit, though battered and weary, found a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that they were not alone in their fight, that the spirits of the past were with them, guiding and protecting them. The Shadows of Severodonetsk is a long and chilling tale that captures the fear, resilience, and supernatural encounters experienced by a rearguard unit during the Russia-Ukraine War. It serves as a testament to the enduring spirit of those who fight and the haunting presence of the past and the battle-scarred landscapes of the present. This detailed narrative offers a gripping and immersive story that provides a comprehensive look at the horrors and mysteries of war. The Wraiths of Kharkiv, a long and chilling tale of the Russia-Ukraine War. Kharkiv, one of Ukraine's largest cities, became a critical battleground in the Russia-Ukraine War. The city saw some of the most intense fighting, leaving it heavily damaged and littered with the scars of war. As Ukrainian forces reclaimed control for Russian troops, they encountered not just the remnants of battle, but also something far more terrifying. Operation Phoenix, the reclamation of Kharkiv. In early 2023, Ukrainian forces launched Operation Phoenix, a daring and decisive mission to reclaim Kharkiv from Russian occupation. The operation was marked by intense urban warfare, with soldiers fighting street by street, building by building, to retake their city. Captain Mitro Sokolov, a seasoned officer, led a special forces unit tasked with critical operations behind enemy lines. Their mission was to disrupt supply lines, gather intelligence, and assist in the coordinated assault on key enemy positions. As the operation progressed, They witnessed firsthand the horrors of war and the resilience of Kharkiv's defenders. The initial phase of Operation Phoenix was successful. Ukrainian forces managed to reclaim significant portions of Kharkiv, pushing Russian troops back. However, the victory came at a high cost, with many lives lost and countless buildings reduced to rubble. One evening, Captain Sokolov's unit was ordered to secure an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. The factory, once a bustling industrial complex, now stood as a haunting reminder of Kharkiv's past. As they moved through the dilapidated building, they found evidence of recent occupation Russian equipment, hastily abandoned supplies, and makeshift defensive positions. However, it wasn't the enemy presence that unnerved the soldiers. Strange symbols were scrawled on the walls in what appeared to be blood, and the air was thick with an oppressive sense of dread. Private Serhiy, the youngest member of the team, swore he heard faint whispers echoing through the halls, though no one else seemed to hear them. The haunting at the factory. As night fell, the unit set up a temporary base within the factory, preparing for a dawn assault on a nearby enemy position. The soldiers took turns keeping watch, their nerves already frayed from the day's combat. It was during Sergeant Mykola's watch that the first real encounter occurred. Sitting near a makeshift fire, Mykola noticed a flickering light at the far end of the factory floor. Thinking it might be an enemy scout, he moved cautiously towards it. As he approached, he saw the figure of a man in a Soviet-era uniform, standing perfectly still. Mykola called out, but the figure didn't respond. Suddenly, the man turned, revealing a face twisted in pain and eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Terrified, Mykola raised his weapon, but the figure vanished before his eyes. Shaken, he returned to his comrades, only to find them staring at him in confusion. None of them had seen the figure, but they could see the fear in Mykola's eyes. Dismissing it as stress, they tried to focus on the mission ahead. The following night, the unit was ordered to investigate a large, abandoned hospital that had been used as a field hospital by the Russian forces. The hospital was infamous among the locals, who claimed it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died there during the early days of the war. As they entered the building, the soldiers were immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere. The halls were lined with old, rusting medical equipment and stained with dark, unidentifiable fluids. The smell of decay was overpowering, and the silence was oppressive. As they moved deeper into the hospital, they began to hear strange noises, soft whispers, distant footsteps, and the occasional clatter of metal. Private Serhiy, already on edge, was the first to see the apparitions. In one of the operating rooms, he saw a group of ghostly figures dressed in old medical uniforms, their faces obscured by surgical masks. They appeared to be performing some kind of procedure on a shadowy figure lying on the table. Serhiy called out to his comrades, but when they arrived, the apparitions had disappeared. The only evidence left behind was the unsettling feeling that they were not alone. The further the unit ventured into the hospital, the more intense the encounters became. In the morgue, Captain Sokolov found old, brittle documents detailing experimental procedures conducted on patients during the Soviet era. The more he read, the more he realized that the hospital had a dark history of unethical medical experiments, many of which had resulted in the deaths of patients. As they explored the morgue, the temperature dropped suddenly and a thick fog began to form around them. Out of the fog emerged ghostly figures, victims of the experiments, their faces contorted in agony. The soldiers tried to leave, but the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Sergeant Mikola, who had encountered the apparition at the factory, was the first to feel a cold hand grip his shoulder. He turned to see a spectral figure with hollow eyes staring at him. The fear was overwhelming, and Mikola collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. After what felt like an eternity, the fog lifted and the doors to the morgue reopened. The soldiers, now thoroughly shaken, decided to regroup in the hospital's courtyard. As they stepped outside, they were greeted by an unsettling sight, a line of ghostly soldiers standing at attention in the moonlight, their faces expressionless and their eyes empty. Captain Sokolov, a rational man, struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. He ordered his men to stand down, hoping that the apparitions would disappear. Instead, the ghostly soldiers began to march towards them, their footsteps echoing eerily in the night. The soldiers backed away, but the apparitions continued to advance. It was Private Serhiy who finally broke the silence. "We have to leave this place," he said, his voice trembling. "These are the spirits of those who died here. They won't rest until we do." The unit retreated from the hospital, leaving behind the haunted halls and the spirits that lingered there. They reported their experiences to their superiors, but their accounts were met with skepticism and disbelief. The official explanation was that the soldiers were suffering from battle fatigue and stress. However, among the soldiers, the story of the haunted hospital spread quickly. They spoke of the ghostly figures, the oppressive atmosphere, and the feeling of being watched. Many began to avoid the area, unwilling to face the supernatural horrors that lurked within the ruins. Despite their terrifying experiences, Captain Sokolov and his unit were soon redeployed to the front lines. The war continued, and the horrors of the haunted hospital were replaced by the daily reality of combat. However, the memories of their encounters lingered, a constant reminder of the unseen forces that haunted the battle-scarred city of Kharkiv. In the months that followed, reports of supernatural encounters continued to emerge from various parts of the conflict zone. Soldiers spoke of ghostly apparitions, unexplained phenomena, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. These stories, whether born from the trauma of war or from genuine encounters with the unknown, added an extra layer of terror to an already brutal conflict. The Wraith of Kharkiv is a long and chilling tale that captures the fear and mystery experienced by soldiers in the haunted battlefields of the Russia-Ukraine war. It is a story that blurs the lines between reality and the supernatural, reflecting the deep psychological impact of the conflict on those who fight it. As long as the war continues, the ghost of Kharkiv will remain, haunting the ruins and the memories of those who fought there. This extended narrative offers a detailed account of the supernatural encounters faced by Ukrainian soldiers, providing a gripping and immersive story that captures the horror and mystery of the haunted battlefields.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.